The Cloud Foundry Foundation is our sponsor here for our podcast from the Cloud Foundry Summit in Santa Clara, California. Our discussion, the path emerging as organizations move beyond the confusion of disruption and take the journey to transformation. We'll explore the new concepts of multi-cloud and how it relates to open source app development and management at scale. Cloud Foundry gives companies the speed, simplicity, and control they need to develop and deploy applications faster and easier. Learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack for our first interview of the day here at Cloud Foundry Summit. I'm here with Lee Calcote, who is working with us at the New Stack as an analyst and helping us with the podcast today. And for our first interview, we have Barton George.
Good morning.
Hello, Barton. Diego, how do you pronounce your last name? Lapiduz. And Bret
Mogilefsky.
Great. Better you guys pronounce it than me. Yeah. So our discussion at this conference is about this whole idea of multi-cloud. What is that story about disruption that we almost always hear about? And it seems now we're like moving out of that into more of a discussion about transformation, right? And there's a lot of forces that are influencing that transformation. In particular, this idea of the multi-cloud, which I think is in contrast to what you see, for instance, from public cloud service providers such as Azure and AWS and Google. And behind all of this is kind of this, the rise and success of open source ecosystems. And I think the Cloud Foundry Summit is testament to that. So, perhaps, Barton, you can tell us a little bit about what your journey is looking like right now at Dell. I know you're in the CTO's office, and how you're thinking about this convergence of open source, these different cloud services, and how those interplay kind of in like how Dell views itself and its path going forward.
Sure. Sure. Thanks, Alex. So a couple of perspectives. There's one, and we're going to be talking about this later today. We ourselves are doing a proof of concept with Cloud Foundry, right? And so that can sit on a couple of different clouds. So that gets back to that heterogeneity, that multi-cloud reality that we're in today. So what we're looking at is in our IT environment is how do we take homegrown applications like .NET and Java that we have written, and then how do we take those and put them on top of Cloud Foundry so that going forward, we can have much more agility and speed. And the reality is Cloud Foundry sits on a bunch of different platforms. So we're going to be looking at it with putting it on top of vSphere as well as Azure, and just testing out the various cloud platforms. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say. So, how does Cloud Foundry play for you guys in this story about multi-cloud then?
So I think that we chose Cloud Foundry because it has a couple of benefits, right? On one hand, you prevent vendor lock-in by being able to run in multiple public and private clouds, right? And on the other hand, having so many vendors that run Cloud Foundry, you can move applications from a public vendor to like a private installation. You can develop on a lower impact environment and then move to your own data center with the real data and categorize it as a higher impact.
I think also it's helping us prevent the government being vendor lock-in on any particular IaaS provider. It gives us that flexibility. And there are certain agencies who would love to take advantage of what we're building on a public cloud, but they can't. And because it's open source and we can sort of document our deployment publicly, we can also make it possible for agencies to run it on the private cloud when they need to. So that's been helpful for us to get the federal compliance story down.
Lee?
It's a great question. I've just come out of the dark on kind of cloud.gov and the efforts that Bret and Diego are leading there. And so just, there may be others that have hidden under a rock like myself. So for those that have, can you guys explain a little bit about that cloud that you're building and how Cloud Foundry is used as well?
Sure. So we work at 18F, which is a digital consultancy inside the government. We're feds. We're federal employees, and we do digital consultancy for other agencies, and we found that we had the same problems everybody else did in terms of deployment, operations, maintenance, provisioning, services, everything. So we started solving our own problems with Cloud Foundry pretty easily. We opt for open source, and we contribute to open source whenever we possibly can. And we decide, well, if we're going to use this for ourselves, and we're building it and operating it, we may as well offer it to other agencies as well. And we're doing it completely in the open. Everything is on GitHub, our entire deployment, everything except for passphrases and keys. The idea being that other people can follow us. And we're taking cloud.gov through the federal compliance process. And because we're doing it open source, it means any other cloud service provider that's working with Cloud Foundry can follow in our footsteps and kind of draft off that work and make a federally compliant cloud pretty easily.
So for Dell, is it just Cloud Foundry, or is it also Kubernetes? Is it Mesos? Is it, how do you guys see yourself operating in this ecosystem?
So a couple of things is what we're experimenting with in the CTO's office are things like Kubernetes, like Docker. We actually have Joyent's Triton platform running, which also has Docker in there. So we're looking at various amounts of different things. The other things is we're also looking to, we resell OpenStack. So that's another one that we've been in since the very beginning. So in fact, I remember going to the original OpenStack Summit when there was just 70 of us back in the Omni Hotel in Austin. And needless to say, it's gotten a lot bigger. I think the number was 7,000 now at the last OpenStack in Austin. So it's gotten, as I say, gotten a little bit bigger. But we're looking.
Did anyone bring a desktop?
No desktops there. But they did bring laptops.
I thought so.
Exactly. We can get into that in a second. But I think, as I said, we're looking at, because of the fact it's a multi-cloud world, both internally and what we want to be presenting to our customers, is a variety of options.
So what kind of technology stacks are you guys building at 18F? Give us some example of a technology stack that's being built, for example, with Cloud Foundry or otherwise.
So one of the cool things about 18F is that we are agnostic to anything. And so we have people developing apps in JavaScript, in Ruby, Python, Java. We have pretty much everything. And that's what we want to be able to support, right? If you run a JavaScript application, it should be as good as a citizen as a Ruby app.
So how are you supporting all these multiple stacks then? Because you must have thousands of software stacks then in these infrastructure environments.
Well, we don't have thousands yet, but we have a couple hundred, and it is challenging, and especially when you're dealing with compliance and security, then you have to keep track of all the dependencies and all the requirements of the applications, and when they get updated, the applications get updated too, and that kind of stuff. So Cloud Foundry really helps us, right? We keep track of all the build packs, and we keep track of the base layer infrastructure for all the platform, and that allows us to patch everything all the way down.
We use Concourse, which has been a great tool for us to keep track of all that stuff, and it means that we can spin a new version of the Cloud Foundry platform as it comes out, whether it's because of a new stem cell or new build pack or new feature. We can spin it pretty quickly and have it in production quickly, so that's we're really relying on the community upstream. Mm-hmm. We are looking at things that we have to do for federal compliance that are on top of that, but in general, the community is doing a really good job and upping the game consistently and how they handle the build packs.
So if I could just jump in with a question, I know when I presented to federal agencies when they came to Dell was talking about cloud, one of the big things I learned about was FedRAMP. Mm-hmm. So where does is this a separate effort? Is it within FedRAMP? How do these all play together?
So we're in the middle of the FedRAMP process right now, which is a fairly long process of accreditation and auditing for your platform. So we are,
it's a long ramp.
It's a long ramp to FedRAMP, yes. That's very true.
Be sure to tip your wait staff.
We are, as of a few days ago, we're at this new status called FedRAMP Ready, which basically means they've done sort of a course pass, and they think, the confidence is high, just technically looking at our platform will pass by. But the rest, the next few months are all about documentation and sort of testing every bit of that documentation, making sure it's true and accurate to give us this compliance stamp, which lets all the other agencies build on us easily. So it is a long haul.
But just to answer your question, FedRAMP is a sister office to 18F.
Okay.
We're part of the bigger umbrella, but this isn't a FedRAMP offering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once you guys have made it up that ramp, it sounds like that paves the way for others to come through. And how does that? Would they be doing the exact same thing, or?
So they can do either one. So the FedRAMP process is really geared toward platforms or SaaSes that are going to have lots and lots of tenants. So we'll be at a state where agencies can rely on us to build their applications and have fairly high confidence that it's not going to hurt. In fact, it's going to help them get their compliance to their applications and get the authority to operate them in the public very quickly. but also for agencies that aren't operating in the public, they can draft off what we're doing and know that it got that same scrutiny. The FedRAMP accreditation includes the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and the General Services Administration's Chief Information Security Officers all signing off on the sort of risk acceptance for this platform to say, okay, we've examined it top to bottom and we think this is reasonable for us to put our applications in. So it's kind of a green light for the rest of the government to follow. But what it means is that vendors and agencies can follow our footsteps because everything we're doing is open, which is unprecedented in FedRAMP.
So I think I've heard that keyword open more times than I can count in our short conversation, and just, I guess real curious about, understanding that Cloud Foundry is the centerpiece for this platform. How has open, been a part of that consideration for choosing the technologies that go into the platform?
Oh, it's a big deal. I mean, 18F is building, ultimately on the taxpayer's dime. We're cost recoverable from the agencies. They use their appropriated funds and pay us to do something for them, but ultimately it goes back to the taxpayer. So what we're building belongs to the people, and therefore it should be accessible to them, and it shouldn't be locked in and specifically under some vendor. And if we're creating value, then we want that value to be available to American citizens, American companies to be able to capitalize on.
And then also, we chose Cloud Foundry because it was open source.
Yep.
If we were to go with a proprietary solution, like between the procurement and the compliance pieces that you have to go through, makes everything a lot more muddy and a lot more complex. And what we were able to do with Cloud Foundry as an open source project is like spin up a small prototype, try it out, and like grow from there and work with the community. Right.
And I would say that we too at Dell have chosen the open source version of this. So we haven't gone with Pivotal's Cloud Foundry or Bluemix. We've gone with the distro that everyone can work with, the open distro. And so I think that's there's a lot of power in doing that.
It sounds like, it sounds like a playground that you guys have inside that CTO office, just with the various technologies that you mentioned. So that's fantastic. How does the selection of other projects that you spend time with, how does open and open source fit into that, or is it?
Well, I think that's a big area that we're looking to further evolve within Dell. So we've got a lot of, and that's something that I've been working on recently, is we've got a lot of disparate efforts, which is probably true in a lot of large companies, where you've got various open source groups that are working on things, and how do we pull them all together into a more unified process? And so, yes, it is something that we're looking at and trying to figure out, how do we make the sum of the parts greater, the whole greater than the sum of the parts.
So that's a question actually we were posing a lot last week at OSCON about how organizations are organizing themselves internally to be, to be ready to be part of open source communities. How do you guys do that at 18F?
You want to talk about it?
I think that it is hard, right? Because for example, when we were trying to contribute back to the Cloud Foundry project, we had to sign the contributor license agreement, and it was months before we could do anything. Meanwhile, we have already a GitHub organization, and we can put stuff out, and we can engage with the community without approvals. But contributing back to a project and all the copyrights are a challenge. And I hear it is similar in large enterprises too.
I consider that community license agreement, it's an agreement, and we're trying to get the federal government involved in that agreement. So it makes everything kind of complex. But at the same time, our organization is kind of committed to open source as a value.
So how about at Dell? What are some of the workflows that you're starting to develop, for participating in open source communities? So, because you have to have some, it's like you have to have some kind of policy. It's like community management at a much higher level. It's like the much deeper complexity, because you're talking about code contributions here. You're not talking about a tweet.
Yeah, and I think it's a case-by-case basis. As I mentioned, we don't yet have that unified plan, but that's what we're like.
What about an open source office? Are you going to develop that?
That would be something that would be, I think, would be very strategic and a good idea going forward. And I think
Capital One did that, and they've had a lot of success with it.
And there's various different examples of companies who've done that. So we had Jim Zemlin of the Linux Foundation come in just a little while ago to give an overview of, hey, this is the advantages of going open source, and this is how you might think about it. They now have sort of a consulting arm that can help you do something like set up an open source office. It'll be interesting too in the upcoming merger how we take the various efforts in the different companies and put them together. I know EMC Code is a big project over there, and how might the companies work together on that.
You might call it something like open source constellation via Sputnik or something like that.
Exactly. Yes, that's what we'll lead with.
Sputnik is the developer laptop that Dell has launched over several years now. How old is it? How old's that effort now?
Well, we're in the 5th generation. It's been about a little bit over 4.5 years since I originally pitched the idea, and so it's been about a little more than 3 that we've actually had a product in the market. As I said, we're now in the 5th generation of the XPS 13, which is the ultra-thin laptop, and now we've got the precision workstations as well. And so these are the Ubuntu-based laptops where we've written all the drivers, and they're available on the web that anybody can get.
Great. Go ahead.
So 4.5 years later, just how different does that laptop and kind of that offering, that Sputnik offering, look from your original proposal? What kind of feedback has shaped your course over the last few years?
And that's a great question, because one of the things from day zero is we wanted feedback to shape this. So when we went out, posted something on my blog saying, hey, we're thinking of creating a developer laptop. We think it might be a neat idea, but we want to hear your thoughts on what you'd like to see. This was to the community and to developers, what you would like to see in a laptop. And maybe if we get enough positive response, this might become a real product. And so we were just blown away by the amount of feedback. And so it did become a product. And then to your question, we have constantly taken feedback and put it back into the product. And so, and then also the hardware's gotten much sexier as we go on. I think we keep evolving it. They keep getting thinner. They keep getting lighter. And there really is a lot of there's a wow factor and a cool factor to them as well. You don't have to feel ashamed when someone's got their MacBook Air. I would dare say with the Infinity display, ours is even cooler. Of course, I may be a little biased, but that's me.
So for 18F, what are you guys doing here at the Cloud Foundry Summit? What's your kind of goals here?
We are presenting, so we want to make.
What's the topic?
We're presenting on running Cloud Foundry in a high compliance and security environment,
okay.
which is the government. And what's necessary and what kind of hurdles we've had to go through to get Cloud Foundry as far as we have through the FedRAMP process. We'll be talking about that, but also we're interested in all the things that the other companies are doing with Cloud Foundry. I mean, we're interested in things like persistence. We're interested in things like placement pools. There's all kinds of interesting things going on, and people adding to the platform. We want to get a heads up on what's coming, so we know what to work on, what not to work on, and what to contribute to.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Barton mentioned some things there about developer feedback and kind of how that's obviously very critical to shaping any product like the one that you're creating. So I guess my question is, I recognize the cloud.gov platform is just in a nascent stage, but has developer feedback or developer input, maybe is the better way of phrasing it, shaped your decision to use particular technologies or some of those stacks that Alex was talking about earlier?
Totally. I mean, 18F. One of the biggest pillars that we do is user-centered design, and that's the approach that we take on building anything, and that's definitely the approach that we're taking on building cloud.gov. From the very beginning, we spun up a prototype, we put it out to developers, and I literally sat down with a couple of developers to deploy their applications to see what the issues we're facing and how everything was working out. To be honest, in the beginning it was very rough. Now it's a bit better. And that's how we want to grow the platform. We want to see where the rough patches are and what it looks like, in 5 years, for 1 year, for developers in the government and, anywhere at this point, right? Because what we don't want to build a platform that is like behind the times for anyone. We want to build a platform that is for the future for anyone.
I think the other thing is that because our market essentially is the government and no one else, it's sort of, we're very focused on the federal market in terms of not just what the developers need and what their specific issues they're bringing with them from their legacy stuff in the agencies, but also what are their CIOs looking for. And a lot of it is around things around compliance and assurance and continuity of mission and vendor independence and things like that. So
they have lots of enterprise storage hardware, for example, and enterprise networking infrastructure. And they have to think it through how this will work across all those different environments.
It's true, but they also have a mandate from the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, which is the Office of the President, to basically get to the cloud and get there as soon as possible. So they're looking for any new development to be done in the cloud, and they're looking to migrate a lot of legacy stuff. And there are new metrics around that for each agency to report. So they're all kind of under the gun to get to the cloud, and so we're trying to help them get there rather than having every single agency reinvent that path on their own.
That's interesting how that's in some respects a top-down driven kind of approach and choice and kind of mandate for you guys to get up that ramp pretty quick. That kind of going back to the developers' input coming into this, and this notion of developers defining the infrastructure it seems to me like more of a bottoms-up approach versus kind of a top-down. But interesting how when you look at some of these container PaaS systems like Cloud Foundry and OpenShift, do you guys see a difference in terms of one being top-down and one being bottoms-up in terms of the culture of the organizations that back these two initiatives?
I think you really need both, right? And it usually happens to be both. And oftentimes it's something like, just if you look at the LAMP stack, which started out as good enough down at the bottom layer and then came up and became the dominant platform. I think you see a lot of that, say with the open source version of Cloud Foundry, people starting to play with it, while at the same time people up top saying, hey, this makes sense. Let's see if we can codify it and make it a real platform. I think one of the other things that sort of struck me as we're talking about is the PaaS is dead, long live PaaS. I think one of the things that came up a while ago, when we first started, we said, okay, it's IaaS, it's PaaS, and it's SaaS. And that was pretty well defined. And then there was a period where we said, no, PaaS is dead. The bottom's creeping up, the top's pushing down. You don't need the thing in the middle. And along came Docker, and it was, well, we certainly don't need PaaS because this has made this whole thing different. And now I think you see this real acknowledgement that there is great importance for developers to have this PaaS layer. Now, of course, these are no longer called PaaSes, right? To make it sexier, they're now, I think it's cloud native platforms is what Pivotal calls it, and OpenShift is no longer a PaaS. It's got some similar kind of name. But I think it's interesting to see something that we had just sort of thought was out for the count is now back. And then given that it's multi-cloud, it's not, in and of itself, is not a welded shut stack. You've got it in the middle, and then it sits on top of Azure or vSphere or OpenStack, etc.
I think of Chutes and Ladders, the board game, right? You go up one ladder, then you go back, I'm back down to now I gotta find my way back around and go back up and down. Chutes and Ladders.
Yeah. Candyland? I don't know.
Candyland, Parcheesi, maybe. Yeah. Well, listen, we gotta move on to the next part of the show here, but thank you guys very much for joining us for a short conversation, but insightful for me nonetheless. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
The Cloud Foundry Foundation is our sponsor here for our podcast from the Cloud Foundry Summit in Santa Clara, California. Our discussion, the path emerging as organizations move beyond the confusion of disruption and take the journey to transformation. We'll explore the new concepts of multi-cloud and how it relates to open source app development and management at scale. Cloud Foundry gives companies the speed, simplicity, and control they need to develop and deploy applications faster and easier. Learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org.